Sue, welcome, and thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. I know you're much in demand these days, so thank you. So I should say to people who are watching this or listening to this, I've known Sue for quite a number of years now. I'm going to say 15.
I would say 15.
Yeah,
And counting, Ross.
Yes, and counting, absolutely. And we've had a few adventures together. So my previous interviews have been with people I just kind of hit like a bolt out of the blue, and they were kind enough to spare time. Sue, as like I say, a long-term friend, and I just felt she'd be a great person to talk with about the gifts of solitude. Sue's got a number of hats, and we're going to ask her to wear at least 3 of them today. The first one is Sue's really into death, which is a topic much on people's minds at the moment. Sue runs death cafes where people can come in, either they're facing death themselves or they're caring for someone who's facing death, or they're just generally worried about death.
Or frightened of it, or, or they just never had the opportunity to speak about it before. Yeah.
Yeah, there is still a taboo around it, or maybe it's a new taboo because death used to be a fact of life.
Yeah, I'm going to challenge you on that. Actually, I challenge everybody who says that now, because in my experience of the research I've been doing and the books I've written about end of life and death and dying and the death cafes, it's not the fact that it's a taboo, it's the fact that people don't know how to talk about it because we've never been educated. And I think that's different. I think we interpret it as a taboo, but I don't believe it is, because in my experience, invite somebody to tell their story about end of life and death and dying and then try and shut them up. They are desperate to talk about and say what they feel and how they relate. And people always say, God, how interesting. Can I tell you, let me, and it starts like that. I just think, oh, here we go. So I think that's what this is about. It's about enabling people to really connect with how to talk about it and take that jump. And the death cafes provide that space for people to come and do that.
And do you feel that at a time like this, during the coronavirus, is it almost like a superstition about, oh, I don't want to talk about death in case I somehow invite in the Grim Reaper? Or what are you noticing during this particular time about people's attitudes?
Well, there's still those awful sort of sayings going on, like passed over. But the word death is being mentioned much more in mainstream on Radio 4 particularly, which I'm really grateful for. I personally think this is an opportunity for all of us to get real with our mortality and to really accept that it doesn't matter if we die of coronavirus or an accident or a disease or pneumonia or flu or whatever it is, or cancer or anything. Doesn't matter how we do it. At some point, we will die. And I think, my work is really enabling people to have a relationship with their mortality, that life is finite, because it is, but within that context, to really enjoy the moment for what it is, to really engage with their life. Because guess what? There's only one shot at this. So why waste it on things that really don't matter? And our mortality and our relationship with mortality, for me, does. And I think this what's happening, this pandemic, is enabling us to have the opportunity to really address this. And for that, I am grateful to it, within the context of realizing that people are utterly traumatized and fearful and full of anxiety, and people, their, much loved friends, families are dying. And that's throwing them into stuff that they don't want to be and they're not prepared for. And I really recognize that.
And we'll come back to that in a moment, because I think it's not, we'll come back to it in the context of non-pandemic times, if we could even remember what those look like anymore. So I'll come back to that later on. But first of all, I want to ask you, how did you personally become fascinated by death in the first place? It's an unusual line of work, so what drew you into it?
I can't remember a time I wasn't. So even when I was a little thing running about, I always knew I was mortal. And I always knew I was just passing through this life. And this wasn't it. This was an experience for me. And then, you know, I went to school and everything got shut down, and all my imaginations and imaginings about life after death or heaven or whatever it was for me all got shut down. And I went into a real spiritual dearth at that time and lost connection completely with who I was. And that lasted a while. And then for me, what woke me up, I was around about 36 at the time, having had a very difficult life up till then. And I was involved in a light airplane crash where, for whatever reason, both the pilot and I survived. And it totally changed my life, because I suddenly realized that the life I'd been living had been a complete sham. And I was being completely called, it's the only way I can describe it, called onto a healing journey that really threw me into understanding and exploring my mortality. And that eventually led to me doing an MA in the rhetoric and rituals of death. And then I met Peter Fenwick, and I did a 5-year retrospective study into the end of life experiences and what happens is at the last months, weeks, days, hours and moments of life. And that was totally life-changing for me. And I just saw that, you know, life is here to have this experience of living in a physical body, but there's more, there's a lot more. And I think we have been so customized and programmed by really unhelpful attitudes and patriarchy and religious dogma. I don't want to write off religion because that's not what I'm doing here, but there has been that going on, and it's time to break through all of that and really come back to and really welcome in this profound connection with who we are and the connection with whatever we call God or the divine or the light or the source. It's there for us, and that's been my path since the plane crash.
I do wonder if, for a lot of people, their fear of death is based on their belief that this is all there is. And so when this physical body is gone, that they are completely gone, which I suppose is one of the reasons that religion and spiritual faith arose in the, well, did it arise or has it always been there?
Well, I think we were definitely controlled by beliefs. Religious belief, religious dogmas, which have not been helpful. But when I turned to the Eastern traditions like Hinduism and particularly Buddhism, that gave me a whole different understanding about my role as a human being, the reason I'm here, my path of enlightenment, if you like. That sort of sounds quite glib because it's really hard work treading that path. But I feel that that's what happened for me, and that possibly there is a continuation. I personally believe there is. I really respect people that say there isn't, and that doesn't work for them. I really respect that. But for me, it really helped me to explore the path of the mystic. And the mystic is about, and I suppose that's the path that I am on, and celebrate. And that helps me to move forward in my life, that it isn't just me as a physical body, you know, having emotions and thoughts. I have this other quadrant, which I call the spiritual quadrant. And for me, until I developed that spiritual quadrant, I felt walking through life as a three-legged table. That's the only way I can describe it. It felt like that. And when I found this spiritual, this part of me that was within me that was enabled me to align to something so much greater than me, the fourth leg joined the table. And I felt solid for the first time in my life. And that I am deeply grateful for.
That's beautifully articulated. So to tie the death part back to the solitude part, which is what my book's all about, there's that saying that we all die alone, which I guess means that when it comes to the time for us to take that final journey, there isn't going to be anybody actually going into the light with us. So, What? What? Okay. I'm feeling a violent objection coming on here.
Gosh, no, I really don't believe that we die alone. In the end-of-life experience research that Dr. Peter Fennick and I did together, he was my supervisor on this, and he's one of the world's leading experts on end-of-life experiences and near-death experiences. We talked to so many the dying, we talked to relatives, we talked to the carers, we talked to doctors, palliative care, physicians, all sorts of people to do with end of life. We talked to hospices and care homes. And a lot of the dying, even if they've never had any experiences before, or they've never spoken like this before, many of them towards the end of their life, maybe last few days, weeks, days, hours, will often say, "Oh, great Auntie Martha's here to take me away." Or I can hear some children playing. It's so comforting. And my own sister-in-law told me about her mother, and her mother said to her as she was dying, "Oh, my sister's in the next room waiting for me, making petticoats." You know, and it was this kind of, oh, how lovely. And it seems that these, Peter and I call them takeaways. It's the spirit world, I don't know who they are, how they become, whether they're holograms from our imagination. I don't know if they're subjective, objective, doesn't matter. For the dying, they're really real. And I think increasingly people are beginning to realize this and respect that actually the dying don't necessarily die alone. And I personally believe I am not going to die alone, because I feel I will die aligned.
Oh, nice.
And that feels to me so utterly comforting. I never feel alone now, because I have my understanding of what God is working with me and through me all the time. And how can I possibly be alone if I'm just going to pass out of my physical body into another, for me, my understanding of it, into another state of being another energetic force or whatever it's going to be. I don't quite understand that side of it because I'm not there yet, but I'm certainly, I want to die alone without anybody else around me so I can really experience this moving out of my physical body in alignment with this something greater. I'm going home.
Yeah, somebody asked the Dalai Lama how he felt about dying, and he went, "Change of clothes."
That's how I believe. That's what I believe. Yeah. And that's a really, for me, that's a very comfortable belief to take home with me to my deathbed.
Yes. Do you think that as people at the moment during the pandemic are in self-isolation, is it the best time or the worst time to be thinking about mortality?
Well, I think it's the best and the worst time, actually. It's the best time because what an opportunity to actually address what really matters and to step away from all the trappings that stop us from feeling and understanding who we are. It's the worst time because we haven't asked for this and it's just been slapped in your face. And that can be very frightening for a lot of people. Personally, I live alone, and I'm deeply grateful for that because I have the space and the time to reflect and to write and to do all of that stuff. I personally would find it quite challenging to be with a big family, with somebody perhaps I'm married to I don't particularly like. And I think a lot of that's going on. And I really feel for those relationships that are strained anyway, because there isn't chance for solitude within that. And I think that can make people incredibly lonely within the context of a family unit. I think that I felt more lonely within a relationship than I feel outside a relationship.
So this might be a good time to we'll skip over the psychotherapist hat for now. Maybe we'll come back to that later. But to come to the Sue Brain, the human hat, about your personal experience of solitude after your second marriage ended. And you had a lot of time to yourself to do a lot of processing. Could you say a little bit more about what that looked like and what was going on for you?
I don't look at my marriage as ending. I just looked at it was just ripped apart. So from one day to the next, what I thought was my future with somebody that I felt I was going to spend the rest of my life with just was blown out of the water and without warning. And I had before that been working as a psychotherapist, and my work was working with trauma and grief and death and dying. And I thought I knew everything there was to know about grief. Not.
Life will do that to you.
I had no idea, and I was completely had been working from my head. I had no idea that I had been working from my head, and I've had people die in my life. I've had my parents die, all sorts of friends die. Nothing touched me. Boy, this slaughtered me, and I had no idea how I was going to survive the shock of it, and the grief of it, the trauma. So after and a lot of stuff happened which was really uncomfortable. I'm not going to go into that because I don't really feel I need to, actually, but it wasn't a nice experience, let's put it that way. So I decided I was going to buy a narrowboat, and I thought the one way I'm going to deal with this, my feelings, I didn't want to run away from them. Something inside me said, if you really do this piece of work well, you're going to set yourself free. And I thought, well, I'm going to take my grief. It happened a month after my 60th birthday. And I'm going to take my grief onto a narrowboat. I had my devoted cat, Dewey, with me. And the two of us, Dewey and I bought a boat and called her Mystic Moon. And we set off for a 5-month journey up to Manchester. And what I did was I used to tie up and scream, because that's the only way I could get the physical pain out of my body and release the next layer that was sitting, waiting to come up. And I realized during those 5 months that I was grieving every disappointment, every crap relationship I had created, every nonsense that I got myself involved in, all the shame I felt about who I was, all the guilt, all the pretense, all the sham. And I realized during that 5 months, I thought I really knew who I was, hadn't got a clue. So that's what I did. And I used to sit on the back of the boat in the evening it's one thing beautiful. We've got 2,000 miles of beautiful canals, and you can do this on the canals. You can't really do it at home because somebody's going to come knock on the door and say you've been murdered. But I would just wail. And there's a word called keening, which a lot of the Middle Eastern women do. They keen over people who've died. And I keened over my life. I just keened my grief and disappointment of how my life had turned out and how I'd behaved in my life and all the people I'd hurt and upset through complete thoughtlessness and ignorance. I mean, it's only ignorance, really. And when I came back from that, I felt released, but I still had a long way to go. And I realized and then I entered into massive loneliness and aloneness, and I felt completely abandoned by God. And then that was a real tussle with God, where, why, oh God, why have you forsaken me? And I really, really understand that one. And then gradually, over about 3 or 4 years, I'd say, I suddenly began to connect deeply with who I was, but I had to do all that work first. That wasn't an option. And I went into the depths and blackness of abandonment, rejection, loneliness, isolation. And I just went, come and get me. There's nothing else for me to do. There was no other, I wasn't capable of doing anything else. And so for me now, I'm reaping the rewards of that. And I just feel like God and me were just best friends now.
It's interesting because it seems like a lot of people struggle with the solitude because they're able to distract themselves from all of that uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah.
That during those 5 months on the boat, you just open the floodgates and let rip.
Absolutely.
Allowed all of that. Sorry, this image came out of pus, which is really disgusting. Yeah. But just letting out all of that toxicity in a really primal, sort of embodied way. It wasn't an intellectual exercise. You weren't psychotherapizing.
No, you can't psychotherapize yourself when you're in that kind of grief. You just got to go with it.
Yeah. So that takes an immense amount of courage. When someone maybe has all of that stuff inside, but we live in a world where it's very easy to be distracted and constantly surrounded by company or our phones or TV or whatever, and to numb away all of that. You just really allowed yourself to feel it at the deepest level.
Well, the one thing I knew I wanted to do, I wanted to achieve, I wanted to, even in the grief, this light which was guiding me, if you like, I suppose, this complete deep light of inner knowing. I wanted to achieve a space where I die as well as consciously as I possibly can. And I knew that the only way I could do this was to do that. And actually, I wrote in the book about it, in Living Fully, Dying Consciously. I felt during that time that I had been blown into a really deep ravine at the very edge of the world. And that's where I stayed for, it wasn't just months, it was a good 3 or 4 years. But I knew it was going to be the long haul. I just knew it. And I'm really into understanding the true sense of karma, which is about cause and effect. And that's, what I did, I have now, the effect of what I did and what I did then, I'm definitely reaping the rewards of that now through just the work I'm increasingly getting involved with, which is helping people to talk much more honestly and openly about end of life, and talking more honestly about my own journey and where that's taken me. And, we all can do this. Grief will kill you if you don't release it. It won't kill you necessarily physically. It will just kill your spirit. And
although actually, after talking with Steve Cole about the epigenetic effects, it probably does kill you.
Yeah, well, yes, it does. You see people walking just around with these faces of just misery and life. And the other thing I really got my head round was two things: that life is not easy, and it's not actually meant to be easy, because those that live an easy life, they troll. But I guess I came here to live. I wanted to know. I wanted to wake up this lifetime. I wanted to engage with life this lifetime. I found that really important. And the other thing is, I wanted to know who I was, and I wanted to own the person that I'd come here to be, because I ain't like anybody else. I never will be, and nobody else will ever be like me. Thank God for them. Lucky buggers. But that for me, and so therefore you can't compare your life with anybody else's, because this is your life. And to stop living life on somebody else's terms, because that doesn't work. The only way it works is for you to live your own life, whatever way, however that unfolds in front of you.
Absolutely. And it's something I've already written about for the gifts of solitude, is that when we're alone and not in a position to be so directly comparing ourselves with other people, it's a great time to unearth those gifts, that uniqueness that we have. But I just want to come back to your dark night of the soul, and maybe ask you to wear two hats at once, as Sue Brain, the human being, and Sue Brain, the psychotherapist, because it probably sounds quite terrifying for a lot of people. I might go, yeah, I know I've got all of that stuff inside me that I haven't processed, but what Sue went through sounds just awful. Like, why on earth would I want to do that? And also to do it in solitude in a continuous chunk of time. Like, how could I even get through that? So I think you've already explained really beautifully why it was worth it in the end, that you've put down your baggage and you've been able to move forward. Yeah, big sigh of relief. But while
somebody carry on with baggage, by the way, but I think I put down the heavier baggage. Yeah.
How could somebody dip their toe into those scary waters, this with your psychotherapist hat on? How could they start that process? And then if they start to feel like they've unleashed a monster and they just don't know how they can go on, how can they find the courage to keep on going through that dark night of the soul?
I'm a great believer in ritualizing grief. I think that's essential. And I always would light candles to myself when I was doing this work. And I think that was really helpful for me, that helped, that put me in a different space. It made the work I was doing on myself more sacred to me. And that was really helpful. I used a lot of creativity. I drew a lot. I took pens and papers with me, and it's kind of like getting it out onto a piece of paper so you can actually see. I wrote endlessly. I wrote 7 diaries, just getting it out. Didn't matter if it made a load of mistakes. Didn't matter what you write. It's just getting it out from here, down here, physically, going for walks. It's kind of not rocket science really, but also knowing that when the pain comes up, if you are willing to ritualize it, make it a sacred experience and sit with it with your hands on your heart, and it will peak. It does peak. If you just sit with it, it's fantastically uncomfortable. And at some point, the body is amazing. It will peak, and then it will start to lessen. And that I learned on the boat, was just sitting, waiting, allowing it to come, then celebrating the feeling of, oh, right now I don't feel it, I don't feel in pain. And having those moments when the pain was absent was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And then, you know, the next wave comes up. So it comes in waves. And then celebrating the moments when the waves weren't coming. And then just going, uh-oh, here we go again. And just imagining like you're peeling back. You know, that people talk about peeling back the layers of the onions. And that's what you're doing, really. And then one day, it was a bit like going through the menopause. It was really weird. The menopause lasted me years and years and years, about 10 years. And then suddenly I woke up one day and I thought, oh, I'm through the menopause. And it was the same for this grieving process. One day I woke up and thought, I'm not grieving anymore. And it was like, oh, this is the next stage now of my recovery process. Don't know what this is going to happen, but it isn't that gut-wrenching, shame-filled, just crap. What for a better word?
That's really good, practical, down-to-earth advice. Thanks for that, Sue. And advice from someone who's really been there, like in the deepest way. Do you think you could have, and I suppose you can only answer this question from your perspective, some people might feel like they would rather not go through that deep work in solitude, that they would rather go through it with a therapist of some sort. But for you personally, do you think that, could you have done it any other way, or for you, did it need to be in solitude?
Well, I'd been in therapy because as training as a therapist, that's one of the part of the deal is having therapy yourself. Didn't touch the sides.
Right.
Didn't, for me, it did not touch. I thought it had, so I was happily chatting away about various things and entering into stuff. But I guess I'm the kind of person that needs that spear thrust to get in there. I was doing a talk at the Buddhist Centre in Bradford-on-Avon, where I live, and I was talking a little bit about the journey that I'd been on, and somebody just said, oh, you know, do we all need to do this work? Do we all need to be, you know, part of it, you know, get in a plane crash or have your husband leave you or, you know, whatever it is? Absolutely not. You have to do what's right for you. And some people find fantastic healing just sitting with themselves with a cup of tea and a nice piece of music on. You know, some people do it by talking to a friend. I think it's a really good idea not to get lost in a bottle of wine. I don't think that helps. And I don't think drugs help at all because that's numbing. And I think one needs to be very conscious of addictive patterns and behaviours because that just takes away from what's really going on. And that takes a big step to actually go, oh, I'm going to break that addictive pattern. But by spotting it in the first place, that can be alcohol, it can be drink, it can be gambling, it can be whatever fires you up for that, you know, that hit. And then you get the crash afterwards. So it doesn't solve anything. And I think it's just making a pact with your soul, just to say, ask yourself, you know, how I feel about myself right now. Is this what I want to take to my deathbed? If the answer is yes, you're doing really well. If the answer is no, then just this is a time to do the work. And it is called the work with capital letters, capital T, capital W, the work.
Yeah. Yes. And it wouldn't be called work if it was a game. You know, it's serious stuff.
A game.
Yeah. So with your psychotherapist hat on, have you worked with people who are struggling with solitude because they see it as loneliness? Like they find it very difficult to be with themselves? And if so, how are you able to help them?
Well, I have to make it clear I don't work as a psychotherapist now. I work more as a mentor. I'm a spiritual mentor, or I don't even like using the word spiritual mentor, but just knocking alongside, if somebody wants,
yeah,
yeah,
correct that then.
Yeah.
With more psychotherapy training.
Yeah. If people come into therapy, they're lonely on some level. They're disconnected. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that people come in presenting with, difficulty here, difficulty there. It's disconnection from source. It's disconnection from yourself. Otherwise, you'd sort it out and go, actually, this relationship is not for me. It's not good for me. Why am I staying in it? And you'd make steps to find things and draw things to you that support you and connect back to you. So the whole of psychotherapy is about helping people to connect to who they are. That's it. So people, they may not mention the word loneliness because it's got such a shame label attached to it. Oh God, I'm lonely, I'm broken. But that's what it's about. And I think hopefully this time will really enable people to get that and to understand that something far bigger is going on in the entire planet than just their own life. This is a collective global experience. Finally, maybe we can wake up and do things differently.
Yes, it would be, in a way, paradoxical if at this time when we've never had more in common with our fellow humans, if we were feeling really disconnected from them, because in a way that I've never experienced before, so much of the world is in the same boat.
Yeah.
And recognizing our shared humanity and our shared vulnerability.
Yeah.
So if, in a way, strangely, it's a perfect time to get vulnerable. It's a perfect time.
And also within that context of how we're talking, because I mean, we've got our own vulnerabilities of living alone, but we're not in abusive relationships. And I'm very conscious of how many people are very vulnerable at the moment, and there isn't the help for them. And I'd say to anybody that is in a situation where they are very frightened by who they're living with, is to get onto a helpline as soon as you can, or find some way of getting out of the situation, or calling the police, or whatever it is for, whatever it is, especially if the children are involved. So I'm very conscious of that going on, because it's very easy for me to talk about that on but there's some nasty stuff going on in homes at the moment.
So it's also a good time for people who are fortunate enough to be safe in their homes to just, without being nosy neighbours, but if they're aware that there is a troubles around in the streets, just to keep an eye out for our neighbours.
And there was somebody talking actually on Radio 4, and she was the head of the I can't remember the name of the actual forum that she headed up, but she was the head of one of the domestic abuse forums. So there is help out there, but you just need to make sure that you're as safe as you possibly can be if you are in that situation.
Indeed. So Sue, just final question. This is sort of the mop-up question. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't done, particularly relating to solitude, with any of your hats on?
Along my path in life, I've really been drawn to the teachings of Julian of Norwich. And I have in my kitchen her wonderful saying, "All is well and all manner of things shall be well." And I take that to mean there are things going on that we have no idea about. We are in the middle of this story. It has not ended yet. It's certainly begun, but we're in the middle of this story and we have no idea how it will end. But within the context of the great changes that so many people have been talking about, on some level, this was meant to be. I know that's hard for some people to hear that, because we're trashing the planet. Humanity could not possibly carry on like it has been carrying on. And my prayer and my everything is that this is an opportunity for us, all of us, to do things differently, to take responsibility for ourselves, for our deaths, for our relationship with mortality, for how we connect more lovingly and kindly with each other, and to know that we are a collective. And each one of us, when we step up and do this differently, will make a massive change. We will reap what we are sowing right now. We will. So let's do it well.
Beautifully said, Sue. Thank you so much. You've been fabulous, as always. And I'm really looking forward to getting this written up and sharing it. You've really been willing to share so vulnerably and openly and personally. So I especially appreciate that. So bless you. Thank you, Sue.